Hey everybody, Brian Von Vier here, back at it again with another D&D story. Today we have the tale of how my silly character broke my fellow players in our first session. This is a bit of a tale of an oddball character I had started out with the group either putting up with her shenanigans or being completely afraid of her, and ended with everyone pretty much crying at her loss. Pan was a warlock changeling raised by vampires, and this was her first time out and about in the human world with a group of mercenaries. We have the Mousefolk Wizard, the Dragonborn Paladin, and the Wood Elf, class unknown at the moment. Pan speaks in a monotone voice and was actually picked as leader after I rolled the highest. I knew this was going to be bad from the start and wanted the Mousefolk to be leader since Pan perceived her as an authority figure due to the wizard's high confidence. Pan's weirdness really kicked off during a meeting the group was attending, as a man wanted to pay them to retrieve one of his ancestors' deeds in a trove. While the Dragonborn and Mousefolk were discussing business, the elf was lying on the floor sweating and talking drunkenly after drinking a dwarven fireball. Seeing this, Pan took out a torch and stuck it into his mouth in the belief that she was preventing him from swallowing his tongue, as she then proceeded to pour water down his throat. When the gnome waiter tried to bring the elf some milk, he tripped and spilled it all over him, breaking the glass. Pan gathered up the broken bits of glass and slipped them into her bag, further confusing and worrying the elf. What possible dastardly plans could she have for the glass? But Pan had a completely innocent idea in mind for the glass bits. She simply wanted to hold them up in the sunlight and watch them reflect the light. Sunlight was a new concept to her, and she loved the way it reflected on water and glass. Throughout the meeting, I had her staring at torches or reaching up to touch things that were either reflecting a lot of light or just looked soft and fluffy. From the elf's perspective, this changeling was pretty much waterboarding him. Pan believed she helped him and that they were now good friends. The elf very much disagreed and stayed away from the socially awkward changeling who had no concept of personal space. At all. Pan's misunderstanding of social cues was so bad that one morning during breakfast she thought the elf was sad because the Dragonborn had taken his plate of food. So she basically tackled him and stuffed bacon into his mouth as he sobbed in fear, thinking she was trying to suffocate him. During the night, while the elf was in his trance, Pan braided a feather into his hair. Her curiosity also got the better of her, having never heard of this drink the elf had been drinking earlier in the day, so she decided to try it. She failed her constitution save badly and proceeded to start sweating before puking her guts out. The Dragonborn held her hair back and asked if she wanted to sleep in his bed, to which Pan replied, "I sleep under beds, not in them." The Dragonborn then lifted his bed, allowing the changeling to crawl underneath it as the Mousefolk tossed her a blanket. While this was going on, the elf, who was now awake, found a feather weaved into his hair and ended up liking it. He then went down to pay for a separate room to be far away from the strange girl as possible. When heading to the ship to set out on their journey across the sea, the elf went as far as to sneak into the ship to avoid Pan, telling several of the crew who questioned his presence in the crow's nest that he was actively avoiding her because he believed her to be a psychopath. Eventually, the group discovered his whereabouts, and as he saw Pan climbing up to the crow's nest, he began screaming in fear. Even though she's a bit socially inept, Pan can still read people's emotions decently well. She tried to figure out what the elf was so afraid of, and upon realizing he was afraid of her, she went to the crew's quarters and hid underneath the bed again. The Mousefolk followed her, explaining personal space and how her actions are a bit aggressive, while the Dragonborn and elf had a shoving contest. The elf surprisingly managed to push the larger, stronger Dragonborn out of the crow's nest, causing him to take 5 points of fall damage. He hurriedly climbed back up to the crow's nest and shoved the elf, knocking him out of the crow's nest this time. The Dragonborn then dragged the elf downstairs and demanded that he apologize to Pan for upsetting her. They both ended up apologizing for their actions, but the elf was still leery of Pan. Pan apologized also, stating that she knew a lot of people feared changelings. The elf replied, "No, that's not it. You're just weird." After watching how the Mousefolk handled the situation, Pan proclaimed that the Mousefolk was now her best friend as she hugged the elf tightly. The elf was then threatened by the Dragonborn to hug her back, and did so begrudgingly, reminding Pan about personal space as she let him go. As they continued sailing, they noticed some strange mucus out in the waters. After determining it was being secreted by some sort of monster, the elf tried getting a sample so he and the mousefolk could inspect it. As soon as he touched it, he instantly began having trouble breathing. The mousefolk tried pouring water over his head, and for a moment he could breathe until it dried away. Pan, realizing what was happening, shoved the elf off the deck of the ship into the water below. As the elf fell, she called out over the side of the ship, "Sorry for invading your personal space." Pan explained that the mucus allowed them to breathe underwater. The mousefolk gave the elf her water skin so that he could collect it, as this would make a great underwater breathing potion. They tossed the elf a rope and tied him to the ship just in case. Suddenly, there was a quick bit of movement in the water. The elf, not realizing the danger as he was busy gathering up the mucus, was violently pulled underwater. The mousefolk and Pan tried pulling him back up, but the tiny mousefolk was too weak to withstand the creature's strength pulling against them and was also flung into the water and the mucus. Pan used her quarterstaff to fish her out, but the mousefolk began to suffocate. Realizing the mousefolk must have landed in the mucus, Pan put her back in the water and tossed her a rope, tying her to the ship as well. The elf tried using animal friendship to calm the beast, and Pan heard it speaking in her mind, telling her to tell him that such tricks didn't work on him. Pan replied that she couldn't because he was underwater. The creature was more than happy to help with that. A tentacle lashed out and grabbed Pan's ankle. The Dragonborn tried to grab her, but she was pulled away too quickly and was pulled underwater through the mucus, which is where she came face to face with an aboleth. Quick note here. We are level 1. 2 of us are newbie players. The group decided almost immediately that we will fight just enough to get away and then have the ship book it out of there. The Dragonborn pulled the mousefolk back onto the ship and used lay on hands to cure her of the mucus's effects, so she could breathe normally again. Pan threw a dagger and successfully hit the aboleth, which let go of the elf. The elf swam to Pan, taking the glass she had gathered before to cast magic stone and fling it at the tentacle holding Pan's ankle. This broke the creature's hold on Pan, and the 2 of them began swimming back to the boat's ladder. Pan feared that this creature would give chase after they wandered into its territory, and then attacked it. She telepathically communicated with the creature, telling it they were sorry, and that they just wanted to leave the area now. This is when it went downhill. The aboleth promised Pan's greatest desire, a chance to escape her vampiric clan and freely explore the world so she could learn more about it, and have a chance at normalcy, so that her unusual actions wouldn't frighten people. Or at least, so she could better understand why they frightened people. He told her if she stayed behind and trusted him, he'd make it come true and allow the party to escape. There was no guarantee that the ship would be able to fight off the aboleth, as there was certainly no way it could outrun it. Pan turned and looked at the elf, made sure the rope was tied tightly around him, and let go. The elf started screaming, "Pan, what are you doing? Don't let go!" He tried to reach for her, but the crew was pulling him back towards the ship. As Pan slowly began to sink down, she gave him a sad smile and apologized for frightening him earlier. He watched the creature pull Pan into the depths, struggling against the crewmates trying to pull him aboard. They managed to get the elf back on deck and began sailing away. The crew dragged out a chest and filled it with water to put the elf in, while the Dragonborn asked him where Pan was. The elf exclaimed, "I don't know what happened. She just let go of me. You gotta let me go back. We have to save her." The crew, knowing the likely truth, refused. The elf's pleading got so bad that they had to lock him in the chest to keep him from going back for Pan. The crew was silent as they sailed onward. The death of the strange little changeling girl who was lost to the depths and presumably eaten by the creature weighing on everyone's minds. The elf remarked on how he felt horrible for the way he treated Pan and blamed himself for her death, as he was the one who tried to get the sample. The mousefolk assured him, "None of this was your fault. If you hadn't gone in to get a sample of it, I was planning to do the same thing. We couldn't have known this would happen." As an epilogue, we have another part to the story. When Pan first joined the party, she was the weird girl who kept doing strange and questionable things that either completely creeped the party out or had them doing double takes. Many of her actions seemed nonsensical, and when she tried explaining what she was doing, she couldn't fully convey her intent. The only one that didn't really bat an eye at this was the Dragonborn. The elf just pretty much wanted to avoid her, and the mousefolk thought it was unfortunate they had her as a leader. Out of character, I wholeheartedly agreed. In the end, her strange habits and actions saved them, and she even got to have a bit of a heart-to-heart with the elf and explain that the waterboarding fiasco wasn't meant to be malicious. I knew Pan's strange actions and habits were probably going to get her killed at some point, and while I planned for her last words to be something extremely sad, I didn't think her death would have such an impact on the group, especially considering she died in the first session. After session, the players of the Mousefolk and Elf admitted that they were legitimately crying and were very much upset over the loss. While it was a great session, they hated that they had already lost a teammate. But this was Pan's choice. I had rolled to see if she'd take the aboleth's offer or to try to get to safety. The encounter with the aboleth had also been rolled, so at this point, it kind of felt like Pan's ending was fate. She left a bigger impact in the group than I ever believed was possible for the strange little changeling that didn't understand social norms or personal space. Hey everybody, Brian Von Vier here. You guys got your tissues out? Because that was a pretty darn sad story. That being said, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more stories just like this. And, of course, check out our main channel, MrRipper, or you can go over to our subreddit, r/MrRipper, to submit a story of your own for us to read either here or there, or maybe even live. Using a help action, come say hi to me, Brian Von Vier, over on Twitch or on YouTube, where I voice your D&D characters and sometimes do a little behind-the-scenes action where I show you the ins and outs of recording for MrRipper or voice acting in general. That being said, everybody, please stay safe and happy and healthy out there. No matter how lonely you might feel, no matter how much loss you may have endured, you're not going to ever be alone. There's going to be that special someone out there for you, or a good friend, or maybe even a family member who truly cares and loves for you. You just have to open your heart and talk to them. All the love, everybody. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.